Well, good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us. I'm Laura French. Today, we are going to have a roundtable discussion about virtual schooling in the Commonwealth. For the last 10 months during this COVID-19 pandemic, about 1 million children in the Commonwealth have attended school virtually, something that they haven't ever done, uncharted waters, and it has posed some issues, some concerns with parents. So today, we wanted to bring together educators and parents and really start the discussion ahead of a story that we are running tonight at 11 o'clock. Chesterfield, it's one of the biggest counties in Central Virginia, and some data is coming back on virtual schooling and failure rates. So tonight at 11, we're going to show you some data in Chesterfield County, if we can put that graphic up if we have it. In Chesterfield County, high schoolers and middle schooler failure rates have gone up at the high school level, almost doubling from last year, and the middle school level more than doubling from last year. So there's the data, and we're going to talk to a family that has children that were honor roll students that fall into this category. But as we said, we want to bring together parents and educators. So if we can put the Zoom call up, we want to thank all of our participants today. Some people have their cameras on, some people don't, because we want to protect their identities. So let's just get right into the discussion. Whoever wants to start the conversation, maybe we can start with a parent and then we'll go to an educator on what this year has been like, and somebody just jump right in. Don't be shy.
I'll jump in.
Okay. If you could tell me your name, your first name.
My name is Lauren.
Okay.
I have an 8th grade student, boy, and he has just struggled this year, and I think most parents can relate. Just, not used to being isolated this way. So I'm just kind of, with my husband, trying to navigate that and helping him not feel so isolated, but it's difficult because we are home every day and sitting at the kitchen table doing school together. He's missing that peer interaction. It's really, really important, I've realized.
Do you work, Lauren?
I don't. I stay home.
Okay, so you are with him each and every day, trying to go over each subject, making sure he's turning assignments in?
Yes. So we started out, at the beginning of the year, everybody did these little office spaces for the children, and we jumped right on that bandwagon. He has space in his room. We quickly realized, there's no accountability in the bedroom. So now he's at the kitchen table. I have 2 2-year-old and an infant. So I try to help as much as I can, but I can help as much.
Okay, Lauren's feed's breaking up a little bit. Lauren, just stand by. Are there any parents out there that actually are having to go to work full time and manage their children's schedule?
Yes, I do.
Okay, tell me a little bit about your situation.
Both my husband and I, my name is Heather Mitchell. My husband and I, we both work full time, and we have 3 children, 2 of which are in private school since August. They did not have a place for my youngest daughter, so she is at home. She has special needs, has a 504 plan, and we are having a very difficult time. She is doing well academically. Socially, I worry about her just because there's no activities at our school right now. And again, these kids need to be with their peers. They need to be around other kids. Yes, it's fine to be around the neighborhood kids running outside, but these other things also need to be addressed as far as the mental health of our children. So that's where I'm at.
Okay. Any educators out there to talk about what a day in the life of a teacher has been like? We want to make something very clear because we obviously started promoting this today. Emily Klein, who opened up her home to us, talked about her children with us. She's on this Zoom call. I want to make very clear she's not blaming teachers out there. So, we've already gotten some calls into the newsroom. One thing Emily said is, we have the data now, so let's react to that data. Nobody asked for this pandemic. One thing that she wanted to make clear is that we need our teachers. She wanted people to know that she just wants to be responsive to the data. So, this is not a blame game. She just wanted to open up this communication, to start this conversation. So we want to make clear that that was not the purpose of doing this story. So any educators out there that can just shine light on what it's been like to be a teacher. In Emily's words, and we're going to let Emily talk, you were thrown into the ocean, she said, and asked to build a ship. So if somebody can chime in from the education standpoint.
That would be me, Laura.
Okay.
This is Bonnie Davis, AKA LaTanya Dean Thomas. It has been very, very hard for the teachers. You would be surprised at this point as to how many teachers are under a doctor's care and are having to resort to taking antidepressant medicines and anti-anxiety medications. We have found that virtual learning is like 10 times as much the workload as being in a classroom. First of all, we were kind of thrown into this virtual learning situation as far as technology is concerned. Some of us were technologically challenged, if you will, and we had very little time and very little training. I have to give RPS their props. They did their very best to help us, but because of the time frame, many of us didn't get the training that we felt we really needed. And so our work days have turned into 10, 12, 14, 16-hour work days over the computer, doing lesson plans, attending meetings after meetings after meetings, PDs, calling parents, excessive paperwork, grading, getting grades from drawn from different sources, finding the resources to make learning not only to keep our children challenged, but to try to make the classes fun and interesting. It has really sincerely been a challenge, and that is why many teachers have left the profession, and many are talking about leaving very soon.
Now, we have that data from Chesterfield County. I want everyone to know that we have, under the Freedom of Information Act, asked every district in our viewing area for that same data. We're waiting for that information. But LaTanya, have you seen the same learning loss within RPS?
Almost definitely, and it breaks my heart. I'm one of those teachers who prides myself in integrity. My integrity I take very seriously. I'm not one of those teachers to just give grades, but we found that we have to literally bend over backwards with this grading system, because we've had so many of our students who come to class to fail, and those who are on our rolls who have not come to class not one time, they are definitely failing. And so when school does resume, they're really going to be behind the 8 ball. We're going to have to figure out a way to close this learning deficit. And I just don't know what we're going to do. I just feel like we're not failing our babies, but because of this pandemic, it's just creating really difficult situation for our kids.
And this is where the conversation gets difficult, as Emily said, talking about it, right? Because everyone has a very strong, opinion on how do we fix it, right? There is mounting data. We did talk to the Virginia Department of Education. We know that superintendents were spoken to last week about growing data that shows that it is safe to put kids back in the classroom with mitigation measures, meaning the research that backs that up. and that there will be some recommendations made. We have not nailed down when they're going to give that, but everybody has an opinion on that, right? Some people don't feel like kids should be back in there when the numbers are rising. Some parents feel like kids need to go back to the classroom because the isolation is dangerous because of the mental health aspect. So let's weigh in on that. What do you as parents and educators feel as far as that is concerned?
I can speak to that. I'm a middle school teacher, and I have talked to my students a lot about just their feelings on virtual learning, and many of them have fears themselves of coming back to school. But I've had many students, and one most especially, that have reached out to me because I also taught them last year and was just very distraught about her grades being so bad, and that she is very depressed. She feels like she has no friends. She has no support system. She's not as lucky as many of the other students who have, parents there that can really assist her. And she said that virtual learning has just destroyed her. She's getting some mental health counseling, but she's only able to go once every 2 weeks. And, I fear for her mental health. And I'm thankful that she spoke out to me as her teacher, and I was able to pass that along. But it's very difficult, and she's just one that has voiced how difficult it is on her, not only academically, but how she just kind of feels like she's lost all hope, and she doesn't want to get up for school in the morning because she hates it. She's on a blank screen all day long. She has a hard time focusing. She always has her phone out, and she knows she shouldn't, but she's distracted. No one will turn their cameras on, so she's not going to turn it on and be the only student with it on. And as a parent, my own child who loves school has been very difficult to get out of bed. He constantly talks about how he's unable to have those relationships that he has in the classroom because when they're doing their schoolwork, they're not able to have those fun side conversations as they're working because there's no room for that on the computer. They can't have everyone talking and chit-chatting at the same time. And he was lucky because he was in Chesterfield, got to go to school for 2 days a week for, 2 months. And then the day I told him he was no longer able to go, he cried all day long because he hated the fact he was going to have to sit in front of a computer all day long, every day for virtual learning.
Are there any parents on here whose children love being home, that the virtual environment has been good for them, that it's worked for their family?
I have a unique situation where I have 3 kids. I live in one community and work in another. So my ADHD child, who is a senior this year, is actually excelling to the point that he's graduating early. So virtual learning works for him. And we would have never known that had this pandemic not happened. So that opens up doors for him, such as he's always wanted to go into criminal justice and do college. And so this is kind of opening a different avenue of learning and kind of tapped into a world that we just really didn't even think of.
And he'll be prepared for college because a lot of classes will be online.
Correct. Now, my identified gifted student, who was straight A student, failed out of all of her math classes last year. Her mental status is absolutely horrible. Mm-hmm. She has been in and out of counseling every 2 weeks, to the point that she has moved out of her home and is now in another state seeking out in-person learning. So this is real for me. Mm-hmm. I'm in this too. So she went from straight A student to, and something that I made in one of my comments was we have to make pandemic failure acceptable.
Yeah, great statement. Great statement. And that's what I want to make clear. You know, by doing this story, we're not calling out Chesterfield as, you know, the county that has failed. That's not it. You know, Emily, I don't know if you can speak up. You know, Emily was very clear in, you know, the promo that's been airing. I'm not blaming Chesterfield. What I want to do is say, okay, now we have data. What's next? So Emily, where are you? Because
Yeah,
I keep speaking
I'm right
for
here.
you.
No, it's okay. You know, when we look at it and we have this data and everything looks differently, right? So I know I have teacher friends and I have administrator friends. And so that's where it seems like everybody wants somebody to blame, and it gets really uncomfortable to have the conversation, but it's nobody's fault. This is brand new. It's a new environment. What bothers me is that the only thing that hasn't changed for these kids is the curriculum. And so to expect teachers to teach the same way and the same amount of material, and to expect kids to learn the same amount of material in the same way, but in a completely different environment, it doesn't make sense to me. And so we're expecting the same result, or, you know, setting the same bar for something, but it's a completely different environment. And what I really hope, and I'm still hopeful, is that this is our opportunity to reinvent the education system. Use the data, look at it, you know, some kids virtual, these opportunities are working fantastic. There's some kids that need to be in the building. Maybe we can learn creatively and not so in a square box anymore. I have two kids, both of them with learning differences, that need that alternative type of ability to show their knowledge. So all this stuff is being highlighted by this pandemic. And so rather than fighting about whether in person is right, or, you know, it is what it is, I guess is what and let's work together creatively. But my disappointment comes maybe from the state level or the guidance, like we need to look at what's happening and we need to change. We can't have those same expectations for teachers or students when the world looks completely different.
I know we have a lot of parents on here, so I would love to hear some more stories. You know, I get this a lot, you know, and I know parents are struggling too with mental health issues, because so many parents I hear from that feel like they're failing, because you still at the end of the day have to make your mortgage payment, have to put food on the table, and we all as parents want the very best for our children. And for that, you want to make sure that they are successful at school. So, you know, I know a lot of you have been so gracious as to join us on these calls, and educators. So let's try to get through these as best we can. We have until 3:40 before our newscast goes on. So I want to get as many of you in as possible. So go.
Hi, my name's Erin. I'm a parent of 4 CCPS students. And really, I think what we haven't discussed is the fact that my senior is in a trade program through his school, and he's already missed out on how much education and how much hands-on learning, because you can't
That's a good point.
You can't do every trade without keeping the same bar and keeping the same curriculum, because what happens when he gets into the real world, because college wasn't meant for him. And I'm supposed to send him out into the real world with only half the education that he was supposed to have. What are we going to do about those students? And now recent talk of letting those kids getting out of school in May instead of keeping them through until June. That's just another month of education that he's losing, not to mention my other 3 who aren't doing that well. They're not failing by any stretch of the imagination, like I know some other students are. But at the same time, my husband quit his job with the county. He was a firefighter for the county, and he had to give up his career to stay home so that he could be the one that teaches our kids, because my second grader's not getting anything but 15 minutes at a time with a teacher, and the rest of it's supposed to be asynchronous. You can't tell me that that's a valid and equitable education when it's 15 minutes of seeing a teacher. This isn't an acceptable form of education crossed all the way from second grade to senior.
Right, our young learners, you know, those who are learning how to read. I mean, there's so many different topics, you know, how do we get these kids caught up? I know that Governor Northam at his press conference last week said that, you know, in these guidelines that are going to be announced shortly, they're also going to come up with some, you know, other possibilities like year-round school, adding days to summer. But, you know, I was thinking there are some school districts that have not gone virtual, that are some bigger school districts like Hanover County. What happens to those school districts? Because those kids have had, you know, face-to-face instruction. Now, some of those kids have remained virtual. I believe 40% in Hanover County chose to stay virtual, but 60% of those kids have still gone face-to-face. So, you know, just so many things that have to be considered. You know, one size does not fit all. Who else? Who else has a story?
Laura, may I add a point?
Absolutely.
If I may?
Absolutely.
First of all, I want to give big props to our superintendent, Mr. Cameras, for making the decision as quickly as he did when we first got the announcement that this pandemic had started. He put the teachers, the parents, he put all of our safety ahead of anything else. So I have to give him props for that. I know that our administration has been working hard, central level and on the local level, to address a lot of these problems. But I really have to give him props because a lot of us are scared. We are afraid, especially with this spike happening. We're afraid to go back into the classroom. I have a 65-year-old husband who has pre-existing conditions. I have other family members who I have to be around who have medical issues. As a church choir director, we're doing virtual church, but I have choir members I have to be around. And I'm just so afraid at this point to go back into the classroom with the possibility of, you know, catching this virus and giving it to some of these people who I absolutely have to be around. But I have to tell you.
Let me ask you, LaTanya, will getting the vaccine change that for you?
It will not for me because, and I'm going to be very candid with you.
And you don't have to answer whether you'll get the vaccine or not. I'm just saying as a whole, you know, teachers in general.
Well, with the way the vaccine is being distributed and all of the craziness that's going on right now, yes. And no, that does not make me feel safe at all. And I have to say this as a teacher. I'm going to say this and I'm done. As a teacher, the thing that I miss the very most about not being in school is being able to hug my students, being able to see their smiles in the morning. They make beelines to me to come and hug me. And for some of them, I'm the only hug and the only encouragement that they get during the course of the day. And that breaks our hearts that we are not able to have that interaction. So we want to see the day when we're able to go back. We just want to feel safe.
Yeah, I mean, so much has changed. Let me ask our panel, are there any educators that feel the opposite, that want to get back in the classroom? And will it take the vaccine, or are you ready to go now?
I can speak to that. I am lucky because I have a healthy family. My husband works outside of the home anyways, and he has not missed a day of work since all of this began. He's in construction. So I feel lucky that I come from a healthy family and I want to go back to school. I understand that some teachers feel they need the vaccine, and that is very important for them. But there are many of us that are ready to go back. The counties have taken some great measures in mitigation strategies, and I feel confident that as long as we follow protocols and really hold the students to following those protocols, that it'll work just fine.
And I think
it's working in private schools. why can't we also do this in the public schools for those students that are not being given the opportunity to go to private schools?
There was a op-ed that was posted today in the Richmond Times-Dispatch. 3 members of the state Senate, bipartisan, there were 2 Democrats and a Republican, that said it's time for the General Assembly to act on this critical issue. There should be no new budget approved nor additional funding allocated to school districts unless schools are reopened for in-person learning. Again, this was a bipartisan panel of lawmakers. What is your reaction to that for anybody who's participating in this roundtable discussion?
I think that's really unfair. I think that if our teachers who have gone to school for 6+ years to teach our children are scared of COVID, then we should do what we need to do to make them feel safe. When you read chats regarding COVID and mitigation strategies, first of all, mitigation strategies are often and quite frequently changed on a drop of a pen to meet whatever standard is needed at the time. So example would be, we went from, if there's a positive case, we will quarantine the entire classroom, to now we only quarantine those students who are 6 feet or less. These educators are not worried about catching our students up. They're worried about bringing COVID to their homes. And
excellent
that
point.
speaks volumes.
Yeah, you're right. The guidance has changed a lot, or whether you can catch it on a surface or not. I mean, it definitely does change, weekly, it seems. Anyone else?
Okay, hi, it's Heather. So my proposal to the school board here in Chesterfield County has continuously been the same, which is the families who don't feel safe with sending their children to school, and the teachers who don't feel safe because of, like, I believe Miss Davis, Miss Bonnie, understand completely. Why can't we put the families that want to be in person with the teachers that want to be in person? It seems like I know there's many other factors, but nobody has been able to answer that for me.
Well, I think, at least with Chesterfield, we did do that for a few weeks. We had the people who did want to come in person. It didn't last very long, but we did do that. And I think, they are doing that in Hanover County. And I think Powhatan and Amelia.
If I could interrupt, we did that for a very short period of time,
Right.
but then we did it again and told we no longer had the choice. So
Right.
Parents are simply asking for the choice, just like Hanover, Henrico, any of those other districts. We want to be able to send our kids if we feel comfortable, and there are teachers that feel comfortable and are willing to go to the classroom. That's all any of us are asking for at this point, I think, is a choice. And when school divisions dictate to us that we don't have that choice is when it's becoming a bigger issue.
Are any of you all...
Agreed.
Oh, go ahead. Am I cutting anyone off? Was someone starting?
No, I was just agreeing with the previous statement wholeheartedly. We want a choice.
Did anyone else come on today that wanted to share their story before I ask the next question? Because we have about 10 minutes left.
Can I jump in and just say I definitely agree with that last statement that regarding Chesterfield, that I've been begging the school board pretty much since March that we needed to refocus and reprioritize and rethink, and begging the school board in Chesterfield County that they needed to get kids back in school in August. And then we should, of course, as predicted, be going out maybe at Thanksgiving like the colleges, because we all knew that there would be a peak in the winter. And the answers I got from the school board was, well, we can't interrupt vacations and we can't make any changes to the schedule of the school, of the teachers, of the schools. And yet we've had nothing but constant schedule changes since they started virtually and then hybrid, and et cetera. And the other point I just wanted to add was if we want to believe in science, which I fully do, that we have to look at the data. And you can see that in Hanover, where they've had kids going to school 5 days a week, there's no increased incident of COVID higher than in Chesterfield and Henrico.
Right.
It's per capita the same.
I just figured this out last week. It's identical. Maybe
it's
just a
science,
fraction
right.
off.
And so if we're going to believe in science, then we have to. And it's also about priorities. What is our priority? Is it school? Or is it, a restaurant or bars or gyms or whatever? What are our priorities? And I think school should be the highest priority. So I understand the fear, and there needs to be two different lanes at these schools, much like Hanover did with the virtual and with face-to-face. But we need to have those two different lanes. It's also completely unfair to ask teachers to do two jobs at once, to teach a kids online and to teach kids face-to-face at the same time. That's completely unfair to teachers, and that's what Chesterfield County did. So
should the state have left it up to local school boards? You heard a lot of that too. I mean, did they have the expertise to make that decision?
No.
Laura?
I don't know, but
go ahead.
I don't know, but clearly some have been able to manage a way that works for their county. So I don't know what the answer is, but maybe going forward, we do need some consistency statewide.
I just want to add this. At the beginning of this situation, our superintendent sent out a questionnaire to the parents, to the teachers, and all stakeholders. And from that data, he was able to ascertain that the general consensus was for us to go to virtual learning. So as an employee as a teacher in Richmond Public Schools, I would be concerned about the ratio of teachers who are willing to go back in person and the ratio of kids who would be willing to go back. I don't know that many teachers in my school district would be willing to go back.
Right, that may be an issue with staffing. But I know in Chesterfield that a questionnaire was sent to families, and there was an overwhelming response to go back in person, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know if that was sent to teachers. Does anyone know?
Yes, teachers and students, parents, families were 80% to return. I think teachers were at about the same rate.
Okay, it was the same rate. I knew that parents were about 80%. I didn't know about teachers.
I believe that when I FOIA'd that information on the teachers, it was actually in the closer to 90% that wanted to come back.
I didn't want to be too
and I know that things have changed over time. There is more fear, and so I just wanted to say, putting people at risk is not what any parent wants. And I think speaking about the funding and everything, it gets dicey, right? And that's where the conversation gets really sticky, because there are parents that have had to quit work, and so they no longer have an income, or have to go out to work every day surrounded by people. And so it gets tricky, because nobody wants to say that funds should be pulled, but we also haven't had an income because of it. And so that's where it gets to be that uncomfortable conversation, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Well, the bottom line, go ahead. I'm going to let one more person finish, and then I'm going to wrap this up.
One point, I think a lot of times when we see numbers like teachers, the numbers of teachers that have left since COVID, we all make the assumption that because they don't want to teach in person. I have a friend who is a teacher at Chesterfield County, and she quit in August because there was no face-to-face, and she has young children, and she couldn't afford childcare for her kids who would not be in school at all, and she couldn't teach her elementary school class while she had her elementary school age children at home. So she quit, and she took a job at a local preschool to supplement her income. So I think we also can't make the assumption that teachers have left teaching simply because they don't want to teach. I think it's because they simply can't afford to teach virtually, or that there was no other option for them. I know of that situation firsthand, so I just wanted to add that.
I cannot thank you all enough for this discussion. I'm sure it's going to continue online because we will be posting this online. The one thing Emily wanted to do by putting her children's story out there, which was very brave because she, you know, this was a vulnerable situation that she put her family in, but the one goal she had was to just get this conversation started because her kids felt alone and they didn't know if other kids were feeling this. Now they know that they are feeling this way. So we did get this conversation started, but be sure to tune in tonight at 11 o'clock for my Problem Solvers investigation. Thank you so much. I will be looking for your comments online on our Facebook page, WTVR.com. Thanks so much for tuning in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura.